The morning they came for my brother Marcus, he was still wearing the jacket I'd bought him for Christmas. Good wool, charcoal gray. He'd asked me where I got it, twice, like he was doing inventory. I remember thinking that was a little strange at the time. I understand it now. He was calculating what else he could take from me. What he did not calculate was that I'd already spent 6 weeks feeding every text message, every bank record, and every piece of surveillance footage straight to a federal agent named Reeves. He thought he was the one running the play. He was wrong about that.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. Let me tell you what I was actually doing when all of this began. I was minding my business. That's it. That's the whole crime. I'm Camille. I'm 34 years old. I run a mid-sized financial consulting practice that I built from the ground up over about 10 years, starting with a desk in my spare bedroom and one client who paid me in installments. By last spring, I had a team of 6, a real office in Midtown, and a 2-bedroom condo in Prospect Heights that I paid for in cash. I want you to understand what that felt like. I grew up watching my parents stretch every dollar and pray nothing broke down before the next paycheck. I swore I was going to do things differently, and I did. It took longer than I wanted, and it cost me more than I expected, but I got there. That condo was not a flex. It was proof. My family's reaction to that proof told me everything I needed to know, but I was not quite ready to hear it yet. My mother cried at the housewarming, happy tears, I thought at the time. Later, I understood they were something else. My sister Diane toured every room twice, running her fingers along the countertops, asking what the HOA fees were like. My brother Marcus stood on the terrace, very quiet, looking out at the skyline for a long time. When I came to stand next to him, he said, "Nice view." Just that, nothing else. I told myself they were adjusting. Families sometimes need a minute when the dynamic shifts. I had always been the one doing fine while Marcus's renovation business stayed shaky, and Diane scraped through freelance work month to month. I thought maybe they just needed to get used to this version of me. I was generous with that thinking. Too generous. Envy doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't come to your door wearing a sign. It comes as strange silences at birthday dinners. It comes as comments that don't quite land right, that you replay later in the shower trying to figure out why they stung. Marcus started canceling plans. Not obviously, not all at once, but gradually. The way water recedes before a wave comes in. He'd say he was busy with a project. He'd forget to call back. When I saw him at family events, he'd find reasons to be in the other room. Diane overcorrected in the opposite direction. She started coming around more. Too much, actually. Stopping by the condo unannounced, asking to use my printer, lingering in the kitchen longer than the reason for her visit required. She'd compliment things with a specificity that felt more like appraisal than admiration. That's real hardwood, right? Not engineered? I bet this building has great resale value. I love how you chose the darker cabinets. Were those custom? I thought she was genuinely interested. Then the money request started. Marcus needed a short-term loan for equipment. Just $4,000. He'd have it back to me within 6 weeks, no question. I said yes. Diane needed help with 2 months of rent while she chased down a late client payment. I said yes. That was how I was raised. You help family, you don't count it like a transaction, you trust that it'll work itself out. It did not work itself out. The 6 weeks came and went. Marcus's repayment became a conversation about how the loan should really be considered an investment because he'd used it to take on a bigger contract, which was still pending, which might need just a bit more capital to move forward. Diane's rent help became a monthly arrangement so natural, she stopped mentioning repayment entirely. 8 months in, I had lent them somewhere close to $38,000 combined and seen $0 returned. When I finally said something about it, calmly at a Sunday dinner, just the 3 of us, the reaction I got was breathtaking in its audacity. Diane looked at me like I'd pulled out a calculator at a funeral. "I didn't realize you were keeping a ledger on family," she said, loud enough for our mother to look up from the stove. Marcus shook his head slowly like he was disappointed in me. "Money really does something to people," he said. "Sad to watch, honestly." My mother came in from the kitchen 10 minutes later and sat down across from me and told me that generosity given with strings attached was not really generosity. I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I stopped lending money. I said it plainly. No more loans, and I would appreciate it if we could figure out a plan for what was already outstanding. I did not apologize for saying it. I did not soften it. I was done with that. What happened next is the part I could not have predicted. Diane and Marcus had never been close. Different personalities, different interests, different friend groups. Growing up, they barely tolerated each other at the dinner table. But the moment I cut off the money, they became inseparable. Suddenly, they were calling each other. Suddenly, they were arriving at family events together. Suddenly, every conversation I walked into went a little quieter before circling back to normal. I noticed it. I filed it away. I told myself it was probably just mutual misery. Two people who felt cut off finding common ground. I did not yet understand that they were doing something far more deliberate. Because while I was maintaining polite distance and protecting my own peace, my brother and sister were sitting somewhere together, planning what to do about me. I was not the problem to be managed. I was the account to be drained. It was Marcus who made the introduction. February. He called me on a Thursday afternoon, cheerful in a way that should have been its own warning sign. He'd been cold and distant for months. This warmth felt borrowed. He was at a professional mixer, he said, and had gotten to talking with a man named Terrence Webb, a structural engineer who'd just relocated from Atlanta. Recently divorced, no kids, clearly had his life together. "He's your type, Cam. I'm serious. Just get coffee with him. What's the worst that can happen?" I remember laughing. My type? Marcus hadn't expressed this kind of brotherly investment in my romantic life in years, but I was also 34 and tired and maybe a little lonely in the way that successful people who work too much sometimes get lonely. So I said fine. Terrence met me at a coffee place in Fort Greene, and within the first 15 minutes I understood why Marcus had liked him. He was easy to talk to, not performing, not trying too hard. He asked about my work in a way that suggested he actually understood what financial consulting involved, which already put him ahead of most men I'd dated. He had opinions. He pushed back on a few things I said, gently but with conviction. When I asked him a direct question, he answered it directly. By the end of that first hour, I was interested. By the end of the third date, I was paying less attention to the things that should have been flags. Here is what I know now about Terrence Webb that I did not know then. His name was not Terrence Webb, it was Terrence Holloway, and he had been convicted of identity fraud in Georgia 4 years earlier, served 18 months, and relocated to New York after his supervised release ended. He was careful. He built cover stories the way a contractor builds a wall, methodically, layer by layer, so the structure can bear weight. Diane had known him from a brief stint temping at a logistics company 2 years before. She had remembered him the way you remember someone useful. When she and Marcus decided they were done waiting for me to voluntarily share what I'd built, Terrence was the solution they landed on. They spent a month crafting his persona, the LinkedIn profile that showed a decade of engineering work, the references seeded through mutual acquaintances in my professional network, the backstory designed specifically around what I was likely to trust and what I was likely to reject. They knew me well enough to know I was cautious about men who seemed too interested in money. So Terrence never seemed interested in money. He suggested inexpensive dates. He split checks without making it weird. He never asked about the condo or what it cost or what I had saved. He asked about my childhood instead, my family stories, my pets growing up, the street we grew up on. He listened to all of it with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared. He was cataloging my security question answers. By month 3, Terrence had a key to my place, a drawer in my bedroom, and enough of my personal and financial information to reconstruct my entire digital identity from somewhere across the city. He had watched my hands unlock my phone enough times to know my pattern. He had access to every banking app icon on my screen. He had heard me on the phone with my bank when I'd called about an overdraft alert, seen me enter my PIN at the ATM on the corner, watched me retrieve mail. He was meticulous and patient in the way that professional fraudsters sometimes are. He did not rush. He waited until he had everything and until he had identified a window. A morning when he knew from our routine that I would be in back-to-back client meetings until mid-afternoon and completely unreachable. He picked a Tuesday in late May. I kissed him goodbye that morning and told him I'd be back by 6. He said he'd have dinner waiting. The first notification came at 11:14 in the morning. I was in the middle of a presentation, a pitch to a nonprofit looking for help restructuring their endowment. And my phone buzzed with a bank alert I did not understand. Insufficient funds for automatic transfer. I had checked my account that morning. There was no reason for insufficient funds. I silenced my phone and finished my sentence, but my concentration was already cracking. By the time I stepped out at the noon break, I had 11 more alerts. Wire transfers, high-value retail purchases, cash advances from ATMs I had never visited. The numbers on the screen did not compute. My checking account, which had held over $45,000 that morning, was showing a negative balance. I went into a bathroom stall and called my bank with hands that would not stop shaking. The representative on the line told me there had been significant authorized activity on my account since 9 in the morning. Wire transfers totaling over $50,000. Retail purchases at several locations across the city, all executed with correct verification codes. I told her to freeze everything, every account, every card. She told me I would need to come in person to file a formal report. I stood in that bathroom stall for 4 minutes just breathing. Then I went back in and finished my presentation. I do not fully know how I did that. Some version of training that kicks in when the rest of you is falling apart. I smiled. I answered questions. I wrapped up the meeting and thanked everyone and walked to the elevator before my legs stopped working correctly. I called Terrence from the lobby. Voicemail. I called the number he had given for his office. Disconnected. I drove to the address I had for him in Crown Heights and stood in the lobby buzzing his apartment for 6 minutes while the super eventually came out and told me that unit had been empty for 3 weeks. The man I knew had never lived there. I called Marcus. I was not rational. I was crying in a way I had not cried since I was a teenager, that ugly kind of crying where you can barely get words out. I told him Terrence was gone. I told him the money was gone. I told him I needed help. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 3 seconds. But I have replayed that pause many times since because in it I could hear the shift, the recalibration, the brief moment of deciding what performance to run. "Come on, let's not jump to conclusions," Marcus said. "Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe there's an explanation." My entire financial life had just been emptied, and my boyfriend had evaporated, and Marcus was asking me to slow down and consider alternatives. I asked him to come over. He said he and Diane would be right there. They were there in under 20 minutes, which meant they were already together somewhere. Diane came in carrying a box of tissues, wearing an expression of concern so perfectly assembled it almost looked real. Almost. I showed them the statements on my laptop. I walked them through the timeline. I told them Terrence's apartment had been empty for weeks. They exchanged glances throughout, quick, communicated looks that they thought I was too undone to catch. I caught everyone. Then Diane said it, without thinking or maybe not caring anymore what I would hear. Well, maybe this is a lesson about letting people in too fast. The room went very quiet. I looked at her. "You introduced him to me," I said. "Marcus introduced him to me. I lost over $100,000 to a man your brother told me to trust. And your response is that I moved too fast?" She tried to walk it back. Marcus tried to smooth it over. but I had seen what was underneath the expression on Diane's face in that half second before she caught herself. It was not guilt. It was something closer to satisfaction. I cried that night until there was nothing left. I cried for the money and for the 4 months of a relationship I had believed in, and for the way I had sat in that coffee shop in February thinking, maybe this was something good finally. I cried because the 2 people who had done this to me were people I had loved since we were children. But when I woke up the next morning, something in me had reorganized. I had been the steady one my whole adult life, the one who absorbed problems and smoothed things over and put other people's comfort ahead of the acknowledgement of my own pain. I had been doing it so long it felt like my natural shape. Standing in my kitchen at 6:30 in the morning in the clothes I had fallen asleep in, I made a decision. I was not going to absorb this. I was going to move toward it. My first call was to my bank's fraud division. I arrived in person at 9 with every document I had: account statements, phone records from the past 4 months, screenshots, the name and description of Terrence Webb and every address I had ever had for him. The investigator I spoke with, a woman named Brenda Okafor, was sharp and unhurried. She asked detailed questions about how our relationship had developed, what access Terrence had had to my devices, what family information he might have obtained through Marcus or Diane. The level of personal detail involved suggests inside assistance, she said. This was not a cold approach. I know, I said. My second stop was a law office on the west side of Midtown, recommended by a colleague who handled white-collar litigation. The attorney I met with, a man named Elliot Park, listened to the full story without interrupting. When I finished, he asked if I was prepared for the possibility that Marcus and Diane could face federal charges. I thought about that pause on the phone. I thought about the tissues Diane had brought, the theatrical concern, the look on her face. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. My third stop was the FBI field office in Federal Plaza. Stuo. Special Agent Dana Reeves specialized in financial crimes and identity theft. She was thorough, unemotional, and precise in a way that I found immediately reassuring. I told her everything. She asked detailed follow-up questions for 90 minutes and took extensive notes. We'll start with the money trail, she told me. Fraudsters are often more careful about the approach than the exit. The exit is usually where they leave threads. She was right about that. In the meantime, I was not sitting still. Every evening that week, I sat at my kitchen table with legal pads and printed statements and built a timeline. Every interaction with Terrence that now looked different in hindsight. Every moment Marcus or Diane had asked questions about him or encouraged the relationship in ways that felt, looking back, a little too targeted. I wrote down the first pet's name he had asked about, so casually, on a Sunday walk, framed as him wanting to know who I used to be as a kid. I wrote down the time he had been in the kitchen when I was on the phone with my investment account, and I had used the verbal verification code. I wrote down every visit Diane had made after Terrence and I started dating, the way those visits always seemed to include some gentle questioning about how things were going, how serious it was getting, whether I trusted him yet. I had trusted him. Because they had told me to. I also did something that felt strange, but that my attorney had recommended. I wrote down everything I could remember about my siblings' financial situations over the past 18 months. Marcus's renovation business had lost 2 contracts in a row. He had stopped talking about expansion plans. His car had been repossessed in the fall, and he had borrowed mine for 3 weeks before quietly getting a rental. Diane had been behind on her mortgage. She had let that slip once and immediately changed the subject. She had asked me twice in the spring about whether I had ever considered taking on a business partner, someone who could help manage client relationships while I focused on strategy. I had thought she meant professionally. I understood now what she had actually been scoping. They were drowning. And instead of finding a way to swim, they had decided to drain my pool. Within 10 days, Agent Reeves called me to say they had traced the delivery addresses for the fraudulent purchases. Everything had been shipped to a private mailbox facility in a commercial strip in East New York, registered under a false name and paid for with a credit card issued to Marcus Coleman, my brother with his address on file. I sat down on the kitchen floor when she told me that. "We have surveillance footage from the mailbox facility," she said. "I'd like you to come in and look at it." I came in the next afternoon. The footage was grainy in the way of convenience store cameras, but clear enough. Marcus, in a baseball cap and dark glasses, retrieving packages from the mailbox and loading them into the back of a car I recognized as his. Diane on at least 5 of the visits, wearing big sunglasses and a hat pulled low, carrying bags of electronics. They looked like amateurs trying to look like professionals. They looked like people who had watched too many movies and not thought hard enough about cameras. The timestamps matched the dates of the fraudulent transactions, Agent Reeves said. "In every case, your brother retrieved packages within hours of delivery." She opened a second folder. "We located Terrence Holloway in Baltimore. He was attempting to sell electronics with serial numbers that match items purchased with your accounts. His phone contained detailed notes on your personal information, financial records, security question answers, your daily schedule, building access codes." She set printed screenshots on the table in front of me, text messages between Terrence and Marcus, Terrence and Diane. I read them in silence. Marcus to Terrence. "She checks accounts on her phone first thing in the morning, never on weekends. Best window is Tuesday mid-morning." Diane to Terrence. "Her childhood dog's name was Pepper. That's the security question for the investment account. The mother's maiden name is Tanner." Terrence to Diane. "Split confirmed, 30-30-40. I want final confirmation before Tuesday." Diane to Terrence. "We're confirmed. She has a full day of meetings. No interruptions." Marcus to Terrence. "Make sure the wires look like consulting invoices. She knows her statements too well." I put the papers down. "This is enough for conspiracy charges?" My voice was steady in the way you get when you are past feeling and into doing. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, aggravated identity theft, because they used a false identity to facilitate the fraud. Yes, this is more than enough. Agent Reeves closed the folder. "We'll execute warrants this week. I wanted to inform you in advance. Family members may attempt to contact you once word spreads." Marcus called that evening. "Camille." His voice was tight in a way I had never heard from him before. Controlled panic. "We need to talk." "There's a lot about Terrence you don't understand, about how things got to where they got." "I think I understand it pretty well," I said. Silence. "I've seen the texts, Marcus. I've seen the footage of you at that mailbox facility in East New York. I've seen the credit card records. I've seen the split agreement. Cam, let me just... The only conversation that matters is the one you'll be having with federal prosecutors. I'd suggest cooperating fully. That's generally how you get a better outcome." He started talking again. I put the phone down on the counter and walked to the window and looked out at the lights on Atlantic Avenue for a while. Then I came back and ended the call. Diane tried calling 30 seconds later. I blocked both numbers. I ordered Thai food and opened a good bottle of red I had been keeping for a real occasion. I sat on my couch and ate by myself and felt, for the first time since that Tuesday in May, like the ground was solid under my feet. I thought about the version of me that had sat across from Terrence at that coffee shop in Fort Greene and felt something loosen in my chest at the ease of the conversation. I thought about the version of me that had come home from the third date and sat on this same couch and felt the specific quiet happiness of someone who has been careful for a long time and is allowing herself, finally, to stop being careful. That version of me had not been stupid. She had been given false information by people she had every reason to trust. The fraud had not started with Terrence. It had started much earlier, with a family that looked at my life and decided they deserved a piece of it more than I deserved to keep it. I was not going to grieve for Terrence. He had never been real. I was going to grieve privately and on my own schedule for Marcus and Diane, for what I had believed we were to each other, for the Sunday dinners and the childhood memories and the specific texture of sibling relationships that cannot be replicated once they are broken. I was going to grieve all of that, but I was going to do it after they faced what they had done. After the system I had spent 6 weeks feeding with evidence and documentation, and 3-hour meetings in fluorescent-lit offices had finished doing its work. After justice, I could afford to feel something softer. Not before. Agent Reeves called me at 6:40 the next morning to confirm the arrests had been executed without incident. Both Marcus and Diane were in federal custody. Terrence had already entered a cooperation agreement in exchange for reduced charges and was providing detailed testimony about their respective roles. I sat with that for a moment. Then I got up, made coffee, and went to work. By 8:30 that same morning, my phone was full. My mother called first. She was crying before I answered. "How could you do this to your own family? You had them arrested, Camille. Your own brother and sister." "They stole from me, Mama. Over $100,000. They brought someone into my home specifically to empty my accounts. It's just money. You'll earn more money. But Marcus and Diane, their children are going to grow up without parents because of you. Just money. $100,000 I had spent a decade building carefully through long hours and smart decisions, and not a single shortcut. Just money. I had expected this from her. My mother had spent my entire life teaching me that maintaining the family's image was worth personal cost. When Marcus's first business failed and he needed someone to not mention it at Thanksgiving, it was my job to not mention it. When Diane went through a rough stretch and borrowed money from our parents that never came back, the family agreement was that we would all behave as though it had. I had always been the one who understood the rules and followed them. This time, the rules required me to absorb a $100,000 theft and keep it quiet for the sake of harmony. I was not doing that. My father called at 9. He was quieter than my mother, but colder. He told me I had always had a streak of selfishness in me. He said a family settles things among themselves. He asked me why I had needed to go to strangers, the law, federal agents, people outside the bloodline, instead of keeping it private. What exactly was the private solution, Dad? A payment plan for money they already spent? He said I was being vindictive. He said I was using the law as a weapon. The law is a weapon, I said. That's what it's for. He hung up. I did not call back. By noon, I had fielded calls from 2 aunts, an uncle, 4 cousins, and 3 family friends. Every single one of them expressed some version of the same thought, that what Marcus and Diane had done was understandable, a product of desperation in difficult circumstances, and that my response, involving federal law enforcement, was disproportionate, vindictive, cold, and a betrayal of blood. An uncle told me to think about the children. Their kids didn't ask for this, he said. You're punishing innocent children. Their parents should have thought about their children before they planned a federal fraud scheme, I said. He told me I had become a hard woman. A cousin told me that I had changed since I started making money, that the Camille she grew up with would not have done this. I thought about the Camille she was describing, the one who absorbed everyone's mess without complaint, who smoothed over conflicts that were not hers to smooth, who paid for things and never asked to be acknowledged. That Camille had been very convenient for a lot of people. Her disappearance was apparently not sitting well with them. I filed the family calls in the back of my mind under things that confirmed what I already suspected, that in this family, the person who got hurt was supposed to absorb it quietly, to keep it clean, to protect everyone else's comfort at the cost of her own. I had done that for 34 years. I was done doing it. The social fallout was real, and I will not minimize it. Diane's friends began posting. By that evening, there were multiple Facebook updates from people I had known for years, calling her a wonderful mother being persecuted by a vindictive sibling. Marcus's business network circulated posts about how financial success had clearly made me cold, and that family loyalty meant something. Several people I had called friends stopped calling. Acquaintances crossed the street. One professional contact sent me a message saying she felt uncomfortable continuing our working relationship given the family situation. I lost a significant portion of what I had called my social circle in about 3 weeks. And the strange thing, the thing I had not anticipated, was that it was not entirely painful. Some of it was clarifying, because the people who disappeared were showing me exactly what they were. They were telling me, plainly, that they valued the performance of loyalty over any honest reckoning with what had been done to me. And I stopped needing them to be something different. I stopped hoping they would eventually see it. I just released them and moved forward. The legal resolution came in late summer. Marcus pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. He was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. Diane pleaded to the same charges and received 17 months. Terrence, who had cooperated fully from the moment he was in custody, received a reduced sentence with time served pending final sentencing. Federal asset recovery and my bank's fraud insurance combined to cover roughly 65% of my losses. Not everything, but enough to rebuild from. In the months between the arrests and the sentencing, I had to learn how to exist in my own life again. The first few weeks were strange, not because I regretted anything I had done, but because the structure I had built my adult life around, the family structure, the assumption of certain relationships, had been fully dismantled, and I had to figure out what replaced it. There is a specific kind of quiet that comes after a long fight ends. I had not expected it to feel so loud. I went to therapy twice a week for the first 3 months. I was not in crisis. I was in excavation. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Sewell, who had heard stories like mine before, was patient with the way I kept circling back to the question of how I had not seen it sooner. She helped me understand that I had seen things. I had noticed every strange silence, every look that passed between Marcus and Diane, every comment that landed a little off. I had simply been trained, by years of family dynamics that required my cooperation, to explain those things away, to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that they had never extended to me. She also helped me understand something I had not fully reckoned with. The money was real and the fraud was real, but the wound that went deeper was the one that had started years before Terrence was ever introduced to me. It had started with the family dinners where my success was received with discomfort, with the way my mother would say I was showing off when I mentioned anything about my practice growing, with the years of being positioned as the one who had more and therefore owed more. More patience, more money, more overlooking, more forgiveness. That system had been running for a long time. Marcus and Diane had simply followed it to its logical end. I still live in my condo. I have replenished most of what was taken. The practice is doing well. Better, actually, because the process of going through this required me to tighten certain financial controls and security practices that I had been meaning to address for 2 years, and those improvements benefited my clients too. I am still in my condo, still working, still building. My parents call sometimes, usually when something softens them or when they are hoping time has done the work of forgiveness for them. I answer sometimes, and I don't other times, depending on the day. I do not hate them, but I am no longer willing to shrink myself to fit inside their understanding of what family is supposed to mean. My circle is smaller now, deliberately smaller. I have 3 friends I trust fully, and a therapist who has helped me understand that the shape I had let myself be pressed into, the quiet one, the stable one, the one who provides and absorbs and never requires anything in return, that shape was not my natural form. It was something I had learned, and I have been in the long work of unlearning it. Marcus and Diane have sent letters. They are full of carefully worded apologies that circle the actual wrong without landing on it, and requests for help with legal fees. I keep the letters in a folder in my desk, right behind the folder that holds the printed text messages Agent Reeves showed me, the ones where my brother confirmed the split, where my sister gave my dog's name as a security answer, where they planned the timing around my calendar. Some people tell me that holding on to those is a form of bitterness. I think of it as evidence that I know exactly what happened, and I will not be rewriting it for anyone's comfort. Here is what I know now that I did not know before all of this. I know that the people who resented my success were not actually angry about money. They were angry about the gap it created, a gap in the story they had told themselves about who I was and who they were and what that meant. I was supposed to stay within reach. I was supposed to remain a kind of shared resource. My having built something they could not easily access felt to them like a kind of abandonment. And people respond to abandonment by trying to take back what they think they lost. I also know that I spent years managing their feelings about my progress, minimizing, apologizing quietly for succeeding, being careful not to seem too settled, too comfortable, too happy in ways they could not match. I thought that was love. I understand now that it was just a tax I had been paying to stay in a family that did not know how to celebrate me. I stopped paying that tax. The condo still has the hardwood floors and the terrace and the view I chose carefully and paid for honestly. On weekend mornings, I make coffee and sit near the windows, and there is no one in that space who is calculating what it's worth, or what it costs, or how to get a piece of it. That is mine. All of it is mine. And for the first time in my adult life, I am not apologizing for that to anyone. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.